But on a day off, when I just want to like curl up under a blanket and get really confused, then I think this is one that I could definitely return to.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corrine from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
Sports manga, warrior women, queer stories, sapphic romances, messed up and depressed millennials, and eye gouging. These are, of course, some of Emma's favorite things, as our listeners will know by now, and these are also things that you will not find on today's episode. Things that we will not be talking about today. And it's not because Emma is not here. If you're watching us on the video right now, you can see I'm here with Sadie and Corrine only. Emma will be joining us because we're doing a special edition of Keep It Fictional today. Now, some of you may remember way back in the first year of this podcast, we did a series of episodes where we recommend is not the right word. We left books for our book friends to read. And so what we did was that we were given the task to choose a book for our book friend that is not in their wheelhouse. So it cannot be a book that they will pick up themselves, because that is too easy, because part of our job as librarians is to recommend books. So that is too easy. We also want to challenge our book friends. So we're not going to give them something that we know they will like, but we also don't want to torture them. So we have to find a book that we don't think they will pick up themselves, but yet there may just be some elements in there that will appeal to them. And so we did this with the three of us and also Liz and Fiona, and I think to varying successes. I'm pretty sure there were some that didn't quite work out, but it was a fun kind of exercise, and challenging, I think, on both ends, just to find a book and also for the person to decide what book to read. And of course, the person also has to guess who gave them which book. This is something that Emma will have to do soon, but I know Emma said it was just way too easy. We made it super easy and it was super obvious. So I don't think it was a bit challenging. And I think looking at the books, I think she's correct. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we've recommended a book to Emma. And so we're each going to talk about the book that we chose and just a little bit of short summary of it, and then why we chose that book for Emma. And then we'll invite Emma onto the podcast, and then she will tell us which books she actually read and what she thinks of it and why did she pick that one over the others. So we are going to start with Sadie. Sadie, what book did you choose for Emma?
I first just want to say that I'm hoping to not relive the Corrine debacle where I ended up picking a book for her that had one of her least favorite words in like every other sentence somehow. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right. So Devon Green wakes in the middle of the night to find two men in her bedroom. No stranger to a fight, she calls to her foster parents for help. But it soon becomes clear that this is a planned abduction, one everyone but Devon has signed up for. She's shoved in a van and driven deep into the Idaho woods, where she's dropped off with a cohort of equally confused teens. Finally, two camp counselors inform them that they've all been enrolled in an experimental therapy program. If the campers can learn to change their self-destructive ways and survive a 50 days hike through the wilderness, they'll come out the other side as better versions of themselves, or so the counselors say. Now, Devon is immediately determined to escape. She's also determined to ignore Sheridan, the cruel-mouthed, lavender-haired bully who mocks every group exercise. But there's something strange about these woods, inhuman faces appearing between the trees, visions of people who shouldn't be there flashing in the leaves. And when the campers wake up to find both of the counselors missing, therapy becomes the least of their problems. Stranded and left to fend for themselves, the teens quickly realize they'll have to trust each other if they want to survive. But what lies in the woods may not be as dangerous as what the campers are hiding from each other. And if the monsters have their way, no one will leave the woods alive. So this is What the Woods Took by Courtney Gould. It is a young adult thriller. And full disclosure, I have not read this book. When I was looking for a book for Emma, I know that Emma does not read a ton of YA lit. I believe that Emma mentioned that she doesn't read a lot of like genre fiction. I think we were talking about mystery books and romance books, and she was kind of saying that she doesn't tend to read a lot of that. So my strategy going into this was to find a mystery book that had a sapphic twist to it, because I know that that is one element that Emma does enjoy. So that was sort of my goal. I started off looking for like a sapphic fantasy, and I found one, but I decided to go with this one mainly, and it's interesting because I have actually talked to Emma a little bit about this, mainly because it also says that this is a Yellow Jackets meets Girl Interrupted story. And I know that Emma likes Yellow Jackets. So that was sort of what led me to pick this book. I actually was planning on giving Emma another book by this author that was out at the moment. And so I was not able to get my hands on it. So I don't know. I'd be curious if Emma would be up for trying that book and seeing how she felt about that one, because that was the one that I had originally planned to give her. But yeah, so this is What the Woods Took. And yeah, the reason I picked it was something a little bit outside of her genre, something a bit more genre fiction, but something that had that kind of Yellow Jackets feel and that sapphic kind of connection and romance in it a little bit. So those were my reasons going into this.
Excellent. I think you just say the word Yellow Jackets. I think that would work for Emma. But I do question anything that always stays and say, oh, it's like Yellow Jackets. Are you really like Yellow Jackets? Do you really? But anyway, I guess we'll find out. Maybe Emma can tell us if she has read that. I sort of latch onto something that Emma said recently on the podcast, which is that she wants to read more literature from Mexico. And so that's kind of what I use to help narrow my search, because there's like just way too many books out there. And a book immediately came to mind. And then after I look around a little bit more, I was like, yeah, no, I think that book that I first thought of really fulfills the brief a little bit more than all the others. And one of the reasons why I chose this particular book is because it's considered like a foundational text in Mexican literature, and it has tremendous influence on writers, not just in Mexico, but also in other parts of Latin America. And it's considered by many to be criminally underread and underrated, despite it being so well loved by fellow authors. And many people are also really annoyed whenever the book is compared to books that come afterwards, or it's always like miscategorized as magical realism, because everybody thinks that like anything from Latin America is magical realism, which it obviously is not. So I think that may have contributed to the fact that not a lot of people might have read this book, but it is definitely really, really well loved in Mexico. And I thought it would be kind of perhaps an important work to read if Emma is looking into exploring the books in that part of the world. And I also don't think Emma reads a lot of so-called older books. I think, it's probably not part of something that she does. Seems like whenever she talks about books that are kind of considered to be classics, very often she mentions she reads them in school. So something a little bit different, and I thought, again, fit the brief. So the book that I chose for Emma is Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. And the version that I have is translated by Douglas J. Weatherford. It is the third translation into English. And I believe the one that the library has and the one that Emma has is translated by Margaret Sayers Pedant. The story is about Juan, who is fulfilling his promise he made to his mother on her deathbed. Clutching his hand and refusing to let go, his mother made him promise that you have to go to Comala, go to my hometown, and go find your father, Pedro Paramo, and make him pay for what he owed us. And that's what our character decided to do. Juan decided to go to Kamala for the first time. He's never been there. But yet he feels like he knows the place very well because his mother always talk about it. His mother described it to him. And so he feels like if he's there, he would recognize the places. He would recognize all the different parts of the town that his mother has told him about. But yet when he comes to the town, what he sees was completely different from what his mother described. It is now a deserted, desolate ghost town. He wonders even if anybody even lives here because it looks like it's completely deserted. And his traveling companion, whom he just happened to meet on the road and who is also going in the same way, tells him that, yeah, I also am one of Pedro Paramo's sons, and that Pedro Paramo is dead. So Juan didn't really know what to do because now it's like, well, what do I do here now? And so his companion suggested, well, like you might want to just look around the town anyway. You're here. Go into town, find this person, tell her that I sent you and she'll give you a place to stay at least. And then tomorrow you can decide what you want to do. So he found a woman after a walking around, not seeing a lot of people or seeing like glimpses of people and they just kind of like hide from him. It seems like they're all like just not really wanting to reveal themselves. And so he found a woman and she said, oh, yes, you must be Dolorita's son. I always said that her son is my son. Come on in. You are so welcome in my home. I have been waiting for you. And Juan was like, but how do you know I'm coming? Well, your mother told me. She said you would come. She said you would come. And so as Juan spends the night there in her mother's hometown for the first time, the story of the people who live in Kamala unfolds. We learn about his father, Pedro Paramo, the patriarch of the family that rules the land, and all the lives of the people that live under him. The story itself is fairly straightforward. I picked it partly because it shares some sort of similarities to some of the stories that Emma has talked about on the podcast. A story that has like a family story, multi-generations, also happen in a place where it's dealing with colonialism and the harm that has been done. It's a fairly short book. It's about like 120 pages or so. So I know that that's like something that Emma prefers. So I thought like, maybe she'll pick it up because it's short. But of course, it's not that simple. The not simple part is the telling of the story. Now, Emma has said that she's not opposed to unconventional narrative. She doesn't mind if things are not linear. And so this book is definitely not linear, not straightforward in that sense. But what the book does, I think, is really will push that boundary and really will test the patience of how much tolerance of confusion Emma is willing to deal with. And that's the part that I'm not so sure about whether Emma would go for it or not, because I think it is supposed to be a little bit more confusing. Now, into introduction to her review of this latest translation of Pedro Paramo, Mexican author Valeria Luiselli, who wrote The Story of My Teeth that I talked about on the show before, she said that Pedro Paramo is a book that you have to read at least 3 times. So maybe it makes sense that it has been translated into English for the third time now. And so I read it twice. I read it before this episode, so I guess I have one more to go. And I think what happens is that once one arrives at Kamala, what you get is you get the story, but you get it in bits and pieces. And you overhear these conversations, you hear sounds, and you're not really sure where they're coming from. You're never sure where you are and when you are. Past and present, real and unreal, everything just all kind of like mixed together. And this very disjointed effect, I feel like, is really enhanced by Rulfo's writing style. It's very fragmented, and so it sounds like the translator this time also really retained that style. And so you get these really distinct images. He used really short sentences. Apparently, he uses a lot of subjunctive mood in his writing. I love how the story is presented because it matches what you find in Kamala, a town where it has been just broken, is left in pieces. And so you're walking around, you're picking these fragments up, they're all scattered. You're not really sure where they belong. But as you are picking more of these up, as you're hearing more of these details, you find yourself getting to know the people as a whole. So the focus is more on a collective voice rather than just the individual stories. So for someone who is like really more interested in like, I want to know like what happened to this person, why it happens, how it happens, then this is not necessarily the kind of book for you. So again, it's hard to tell sometimes from what Emma said, because I think sometimes Emma was like, but I want to know more about the people. So it'll be interesting to see what she thinks of that. But I really like it because it really builds and as you encounter more of those, and it makes for really powerful stories because you're kind of like, you're overwhelmed by just this collective anguish and devastation that is in that town. It's also a very surreal book, which, especially the first half of the book, which I think it might appeal to Emma. But again, if she's willing to give in to just like not knowing what's going on and just kind of run with it. So it may work, it may not work. But yeah, it's interesting doing a reread of this. Whenever I encounter a book that is like very different and that intrigues me and that I'm not really sure what's happening, I tend to just kind of like, okay, well, I'm not going to think. I'm going to shut down the part of my brain that is thinking. I'm just going to like immerse myself in the book. So for this episode, knowing that I have to talk about it and read it in a different way, I have to kind of like force my other side of my brain to open up a little bit, to pay attention. So it's interesting to have that reread. So, I'm looking forward to reading it a third time. And yeah, we'll see if Emma actually bothers to read this or not, because I think even just looking at the story, it's not necessarily something that's similar to what Emma usually reads. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, so that is Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo, and my version here is translated by Douglas J. Weatherford. All right, so we have one more from Corinne. Corinne, what did you pick for Emma and why?
Okay, so I chose something that I think the plot is perhaps a little bit more straightforward. I know that Emma doesn't mind going dark. And that's kind of what I had in mind when I was choosing a book for Emma. I wanted to choose a Korean book in translation, which I think made it super easy for Emma to guess which one it was. And I wanted to go in a genre that I don't think Emma has talked about a lot on the podcast, because of course we read books that don't end up on the podcast, but like more of like a psychological thriller. So something that was kind of like bordering on horror, or just like the horror of the human life. And so I kind of went with something like that I didn't think that Emma would necessarily pick up, but might enjoy. Maybe, but it would all depend on whether she connected with the writing. This is also another short one. It's about 200 pages. And it is one that I think, Virginia, you've read this one, perhaps. This is The Hole. Yes, Virginia has read this one by Hye-Young Pyun, translated by one of my favorite translators, Sora Kim-Russell. And yeah, this is dark. This is dark. This is really dark. So Ogi, our main character, wakes up from a coma, and he finds himself unable to talk, unable to move, unable to do basic day-to-day functions. He was a cartographer, and when he is woken up, he is told that his wife is dead and that he has been paralyzed. And because his jaw has been kind of shattered, he is also unable to speak or communicate. They were on their way to a hotel for kind of like a mini vacation to clear the air between them, just kind of take a break together. And in a kind of like horrible split-second decision, when they're about to get into the accident, he swerves to protect himself. And now his wife is dead. In this state, he needs round-the-clock care, and the person who kind of steps up to help him is his mother-in-law, the mother of his dead wife. She has become his caretaker that he is wholly dependent on. They move into the house, and she takes care of his day-to-day functions. Now, the one thing that she does that really shocks him is that she takes over his wife's garden. Their garden used to be kind of a shared space where they would have friends over to enjoy a barbecue and have friends, colleagues. It used to be kind of like a shared space. And one day she decides, nope, garden is my space. And she starts to cultivate it in the way that she sees fit. But the mother-in-law is not continuing his wife's care of the garden. In fact, she abandons it to the wild, but still does spend a lot of time there, digging holes, digging deeper and bigger holes, deeper and larger holes. And when she's asked, what is she doing? Why is she digging all these holes? She says she's just finishing what her daughter started. So this is the winner of the Shirley Jackson Award, and kind of much in the history of that. It's creepy. It's really creepy, and it's dark. It's dark. There's kind of like surprises and revelations on the way. Things are said and unsaid. I read a review where someone was like, really, the interesting story is happening kind of over here. And you're just getting glimpses of that story from afar. And so this is one that really, really divides readers. Kind of looking through all of the Goodreads, it's either a 1-star review or it is a 5-star review. People either think that the premise itself is abhorrent, that, someone is completely at the mercy of someone else somewhere else. Some people find that the writing is too disjointed. Some people find that why on earth would you write a story like this? How dare you? And for other people, they find it a really interesting, complex narrative told in kind of like a literary horror style. So I know that Emma doesn't mind wading into a controversy to give an opinion. So I am very curious kind of like where Emma ended up on this particular book, if they ended up choosing it, and whether they thought that there was a little something more to the story, or if it was just, as one good reviewer said, a giant waste of paper. Throw it in the hole. So yeah, I want to see if Emma threw it in the hole or jumped into the hole. Jumped into the hole. Yep, that's my book.
All right. So three quite different books. I guess we'll see what Emma picks. So let's invite our guest of honor onto the show.
Hello. I'm here.
Yes, welcome. Welcome. So Emma, you are actually in the room with us, of course, so you heard all our reasoning for why we recommend or why we pick the book for you. So now it's your turn to tell us, which book did you actually read? And I'm assuming you got all of them right, like who picked which book for you.
Yes. So I'll show the covers since I'm the one that has the books. And it was funny because I received two on my desk at the same time and then one a little bit later. So the first two I got with this one, which took about 2 entire seconds to realize it was Sadie's book. Once I saw YA on the call number, I was like, yep, got that one right. And then this one was Virginia's. Again, pretty simple. And then later that evening, once I found a Korean book in translation, I was like, well, you could have made that a little bit harder. I love a good trivia. I love a good guessing game. But you know what? Sometimes it's validating to have trivia that is immediately you understand exactly what the answers are. So yeah, I'm glad that I got the answers correct. That's very, very nice for me. Yeah, I think you guys did a really great job of picking books that I would not normally pick up or that I might not normally know about, but books that are kind of have some of these themes that I would be interested in. Sadie, I think picking a Yellow Jackets read-alike was a really great choice. The issue that comes with that is I love Yellow Jackets so much. So if it is not, like Virginia mentioned, if it's not as good as Yellow Jackets, then it's just going to be a huge disappointment. And I will get to that in a little bit. Virginia, I'm glad that you listened. I'm glad that you heard that I wanted to read more Mexican literature. So I will admit this is a book this one's one that I started. I got about 30 pages in, which since it's a novella is about a third or a fourth of the way through the book. It was one of those where I would read a little bit and then I would put it down and then I would start reading it again. And I would have no idea what was going on. So I think it's one. So Virginia, I guess I'll start with you. I enjoy the concept. I think looking on the surface of what this book is about, I think you did a really great job of picking a book that I would enjoy. I think you have a great understanding of what my reading taste is. I love surrealism. I love unconventional narratives. I love things that kind of blend what's going on in the past, what's going on in the present. That whole aspect of it was totally up my alley. The writing style, you said that they use these really short sentences. I think it kind of reminded me of the book I read for Latin American Heritage Month, Witches, which is another Mexican book in translation. And so I feel like that writing style might be kind of typical of Spanish language or Mexican literature. And the confusing aspects, the kind of rambling through the story aspects of that reminded me a lot of the parts of Witches that were about the woman in Oaxaca, the kind of storyteller, the oral storyteller. So that I could really get behind this, this is kind of this is how rural indigenous Mexican writing flows. And I feel like this would be a really great book to listen to. And unfortunately, the only audiobooks I was able to find were in Spanish, and my Spanish is not good enough to be able to understand one of those. But I feel like this is one where, if it was a story told orally, I would be able to understand it a lot better. I do love surrealism, but I do think this one was a bit too confusing for what I was looking for this week. But it is definitely something that I will come back to in the future. And I guess I have to read it 3 times now in order to fully get it. But yeah, it's totally something. Karina's saying, no, I don't. I do think it's a book that I'll understand better if I read it in one sitting, because then I won't like put it down, forget what's happening, and have to pick it up again. And it's short enough that I think I'd be able to do that. I'm not Korean. I can't read every single book in one sitting, but I think with this one, I could do it. So, yeah, in summary, this is a book that I did not read in entirety for this week, but I definitely think I will. I just don't think I had the patience for it right now. But on a day off, when I just want to like curl up under a blanket and get really confused, then I think this is one that I could definitely return to. So thank you, Virginia, for this lovely recommendation that I will put in my back pocket for the future.
I know. I just want to say that that's what I wish for all of my weekends, obviously, is to just curl up under a blanket and get very, very confused.
Thank you, Sadie. It's my goal. It's my goal in life. So yeah, next I will do Corinne's book, which is the one that I actually know the least about. This one, I made the mistake of trying to start reading this when I had a headache on Monday, and I made it to page 6, and then I had to go take a nap. So I've only made it to page 6 in this book. You're right, I do like psychological books. I like books that are like the horror is the human mind, the human condition, and the human existence. So I think your book picking strategy, thinking what's a book Emma would like, I think you were on the money there. I read that this was a Misery read-alike. I haven't read Misery, but I've seen the movie and I enjoyed the movie. So I feel like this is something that I could get into. The fact that it won the Shirley Jackson Award is high praise, so that's always a good sign. But I don't really read a lot of I don't know if you said that this was like a mystery thriller or just a psychological thriller. I read psychological books, but I don't really read a lot of like straightforward thriller books. As Virginia said, I typically don't read stuff that's like plot by plot by plot by plot. I like things that are more confusing. And so I don't think this is one that I would normally pick up. I actually showed it to Kate, and Kate was immediately like, oh, that's a book that I will read. Thank you for the recommendation, Karine. So I think this one is a bit more in their wheelhouse than it would be in mine. But I might give it a try someday if I'm ever just looking for a thriller that'll like really mess me up in the head, which, as you all know, I enjoy books that mess you up in the head. As far as the reviews controversy, I love a good review controversy. Typically, if I don't like a book, I immediately go on Goodreads and I go, who agrees with me? And like, I actually had this issue this week, and I'll get to that. But typically when this happens, every review I find, everybody loved the book. Everybody thought everything was so amazing. And I'm like, but why don't you see the problems that I see? And so I am interested to read this one because I did see a lot of reviews where people were like, I understood the plot, but I think there was something subtextual going on that I just didn't get. I saw one review where it was like, I just don't think I'm smart enough for this book. And so I'm interested to see kind of like where those thoughts came from, kind of why people had that reaction and had such like severe reactions to it. Like you say, is Emma going to jump in the hole? Is Emma going to throw the book in the hole? I think Emma's going to jump in the hole. Emma likes a good controversy. So I think I'll definitely give it a try. But yeah, this is one that unfortunately I just did not have kind of the brain wherewithal to really get into this week. The book that I did read in entirety was Sadie's book. And this one I picked because it was available as an audiobook, and I just wanted something I could play while I was doing chores in my apartment. So thank you, Sadie, for picking a lovely YA that I could just like zone out and get into the story. So yeah, I read What the Woods Took. Another motivation for reading this one is Sadie is right. I don't read a lot of YA. I used to enjoy YA more. I feel like I read it more like when I was a teen, when I was a young adult, and I was in when I was in grad school, when I was at UBC, I read a lot of YA for those courses, and I did read YA that I enjoyed for those. But nowadays, I feel like I'm leaning more into like contemporary literary fiction. That was another point. Virginia said that she doesn't think I read a lot of old books, and that's wrong. I do. The books that I read for the podcast tend to be more contemporary, but I have read and enjoyed a lot of older books, especially having been an English major. So a lot of that kind of comes from my university days. But yeah, lately I've been reading a lot more contemporary adult fic. And I should, as a youth librarian, be knowing what the teens are reading and knowing what the new YAs are. So Sadie kind of, I think, hit this challenge on the head and like giving me something that I would not pick up, but something that I should be reading, and kind of finding something that I might potentially enjoy, but like challenging me to go out of my comfort zone, out of my normal wheelhouse, and read something a little bit different. So thank you, Sadie. Now that that is said, I did not really like it. um, I think YA just might not be my thing right now. I think it was a bit too, like, the storytelling. Like, while Virginia's book was too confusing, this one was too straightforward. It was very much like this happened and they felt this way, and then this happened and they felt this way. And I respect that some people want that in their books, but I just don't think that's what I want, at least right now. So, yeah, one issue I had was I think there was a lot of telling and not showing. I think there was a lot of the author just telling you exactly how the characters were feeling and exactly what was going on without you really kind of getting to that point on your own through the writing, which, like, that could just be a quality of young adult lit that I'm not used to anymore. So that might not even be a very valid critique, but that was something that kind of irked me as I was reading it. I did look at Goodreads reviews. I'm always curious to know what other people think of books, especially if I'm not super into it. And a lot of people were really praising the character development. So, as Sadie said, this is a book where 5 teens kind of get stranded in the woods. So they're in this, like, it's supposed to be like a therapy camp where they're like they have these 2 counselors. One of them is more of a therapist, one of them is more of like the woodsy backcountry girl, and they're supposed to be guiding these teens through a 50-day hike in the wilderness. 50 days. I like to camp. I like to hike. I like to be outside. 50 days is too long without a shower. So I have a few problems with this. The first problem is that the 2 counselors that are supposed to be guiding them are 22 and 21, respectively. These teens are like between 15 and 17. And so, like, having a counselor that's like 3 years older than you is not going to do you any good, especially when one of them is supposed to be providing you with therapy treatments. This man is not a therapist. And then the other counselor, who's supposed to be like the wilderness expert, she says that in order to be more in touch with nature, instead of sleeping in tents, they're going to sleep like under tarps that they hang from trees so they can be closer to the nature. Like, how dangerous is that? How dangerous is that? It's just, they're so severely unprepared for this, extremely unqualified to be doing the work that they're doing. And so, of course, immediately into this 50-day journey, these two counselors disappear. And now the teens are like living off of a small supply of camp food with only tarps to protect them. They may or may not have a hunting knife. One boy is like, oh, we're going to have to hunt for food at some point. So I'm going to like craft a spear out of a stick. And I'm just like, this is not logical. So I don't know. I don't know what the author was thinking, whether I was just supposed to suspend my disbelief and believe that like a 16-year-old boy could carve a spear and then kill a deer with it and then know how to like turn that deer into venison that was edible. I've watched a lot of Yellow Jackets and I've seen their counselor, their teacher explain to them, I went hunting with my dad. This is how you do it. Like, I've seen it happen realistically. This was not realistic. So yeah, that was one kind of major qualm just with the story as a whole and with the character development. So we've got these 5 teens, and it was a lot of like, at the beginning, they were all angsty and they had all these problems. And at the end, they grew so much. But the author kept saying, he grew so much. This character couldn't believe how much this person had changed. So rather than like me seeing through their actions and through their thought processes that these characters had grown because of this therapy experience or because of this wilderness experience, the author had to tell me exactly how they grew and exactly why they grew. And all these other characters were so impressed with them. And I'm just like, I don't believe you. So there were a lot of points in the book where like the narrator of the audiobook would say something and I would just kind of roll my eyes. Yeah. The characters are also all supposed to be like delinquents who require wilderness therapy. And one kid, like, he took some Adderall that he had stolen from his mom and then was sent to the woods. Another kid was like caring for his dying grandmother and I think selling her medication for money. So that one is a little bit more problematic. But these kids were all like framed as terrible delinquents when they were in fact just like really sweet and kind and wholesome people. And like, I'm not saying that I need like my bad kids to actually be bad, but none of these characters were problematic and they were supposed to be delinquents sent to wilderness camp. The main character was she was a foster kid. And so she had a lot of kind of anger, a lot of like acting out in her life. She, of course, was dealing with a lot of her own trauma. And I don't think her character changed at all through the entire book. I think she just kind of stayed a hot-headed, angry person And she was gay. There was a little bit of lesbian representation in it. 2 of the 5 kids were lesbians. And of course, they got together because when you put 2 lesbians in the same room, they must be in love. They must fall in love. That's just how lesbians work. Um, so yeah, that's the thing that frustrates me with sapphic literature. I appreciate you, Sadie, for finding me a book with sapphic representation. But something that frustrates me about sapphic literature is when there are 2 gay characters, so of course they have to get together. When it's like, no, gay people have their own types and tastes and personalities, and like just because 2 people are gay doesn't mean they have chemistry. And the other queer character, the bully, her name was Sheridan, the one that was like lilac haired and was just like bullying everybody and being cruel to everybody. She was just like severely unlikable throughout the entire book. Just the most insufferable young adult fiction character I think I've ever read. So then when the main character falls in love with her eventually, I was like, really? This girl? You were fighting the entire time. Yeah, so yeah, that's kind of my take. Also, every character read as white. Every character was described as being like pale skinned, fair haired. And that always kind of irks me when there's not a lot of diversity amongst the characters in the book. And that was another thing where people on Goodreads were reviewing all the great diversity. And it's like, yeah, just because 2 of the characters were gay doesn't mean the cast is diverse because they're all like Pacific Northwest white people. So yeah, Sadie, I appreciate you for giving me something out of my wheelhouse. I did finish the book. I read it in entirety. I would absolutely recommend it to any young adult reader who enjoys like thrillers, scary stuff. It wasn't scary enough for me personally, but it would probably be scary for a teen if they're not typically into horror. But the like mysterious creatures that they encounter in the woods, they were explained too easily. The kids were able to figure out exactly what they were and what their goals were too easily. And one of the things I love about Yellow Jackets is you don't know what's happening. They never tell you exactly what's going on in the woods and whether or not it's supernatural. So the fact that everything was just kind of like they found all their answers halfway through the book and then they were able to defeat the characters by the end, there wasn't enough intrigue to really keep me invested in like the thriller horror aspect of the story. But yeah, if a young adult reader isn't necessarily into like hardcore horror, but wants to read something a little bit creepy, if they like kind of like adventure, wilderness, teens supporting each other, learning from each other, everybody obviously learns from their mistakes and becomes a wholesome, good little child by the end of it. If people like books like that, then they might enjoy this. And I haven't read any of Courtney Gould's other stuff. So Sadie, I don't know if you've read those books and you could speak on to other people that might enjoy Courtney Gould's other fiction. But yeah, any young adult reader who likes thrillers, wilderness stories, I feel like I'm having a really hard time selling it because I had a lot of qualms with it. But yeah, somebody might like this book. So this is What the Woods Took by Courtney Gould.
Well, thank you, Emma. It's always fun to hear your analysis, and it's always great when you are like you told us earlier that it was kind of a little bit of going to be an unhinged just rant, and I love that. That is like my favorite type of Emma review. So thank you for doing that. Because I think normally, like when we pick a book ourselves, like, we feel like more obligated to write things out and be a little more organized. But yeah, an unhinged review is always fun from you. And also thank you for saying nice things about Corinne's and my book. I know you were very confused. Sorry.
I think I'll read it at some point. Just this week I didn't have the patience.
Sure. But anyway, it was fun. And I'm glad that because you actually volunteered to do this, you were like, hey, you guys did this thing before, I would love to be, doing one of those. So yeah, so very brave of you and very courageous of you to do so. Well, now that we have given a book that we know that Emma may or may not like, I thought to end our episode today, and especially after hearing what Emma has said, and then also kind of thinking more about, what Emma has told us that she likes and not like, I thought we'll end the episode on maybe a book that we would rather give to Emma. So we were like, well, hey, I think this would be an Emma book, So we'll end with like we think maybe more likely that you will enjoy. What would be something that you think is more up Emma's alley that she may not have read yet?
So I have no idea if Emma would like this or not, but when I was looking for books to recommend legitimately to Emma, this one came up and I had this moment of, well, this is the book that I should have picked for this episode. This is the one that I should have done. I have no idea if Emma's read it, but it is Alice Isn't Dead by Joseph Fink. It's a little bit strange. It's a little bit, I don't know if I'd push it right into banana pants, but there's a little bit about it that just doesn't quite make sense. It's a little supernatural. Emma, if you are familiar with Night Vale, the podcast, Welcome to Night Vale, it is written by one of the creators of that, and kind of follows the same just kind of weird supernatural conspiracy theory world. It is about a long-haul trucker who is on the search for her wife, who she's convinced is not dead. She is alive. And so she is on the search for her, kind of traveling across the country and coming up against some very weird, strange, creepy, supernaturally, maybe things. So that is my recommendation to you. Alice Isn't Dead by Joseph Fink.
Something I love is women in traditionally masculine fields. So a female trucker, immediately a gold star.
See, that's what I should have picked. It's 100% what I should have picked for today. I don't know why I did not think of it. I have actually read it, so I would have been able to speak so much more about it. But anyways, there you go.
It's a really good recommendation for Emma, Sadie. Again, it just like occurred to me last night that I was like, oh, snap. There is a book that I should have given to Emma that is not in her wheelhouse, but I think she would have really enjoyed. I would have recommended Cherry Magic. His subtitle of it is 30 Years of Virginia Can Make You a Wizard, like you do. It is a fun office romance, boy love. So he hasn't had any romantic experience, so he can read minds. And it turns out that one of the guys in his office is very into him. And he doesn't quite know what to do with that. And it is so wonderful, wholesome, heartwarming, wonderful. It has an absolutely impeccable Japanese live action adaptation, which is just like, so good. And then on a book that actually is in your wheelhouse that I think you would enjoy, that I don't know if you've read before, is Tilly Walden's On a Sunbeam. Have you read this, Emma?
I haven't, but it has been recommended to me before. So Tilly Walden is actually kind of a blind spot in my reading. You keep mentioning her, people keep telling me I have to read her, and I just haven't yet. And I don't know why.
Yeah, I think now's the time. On a Sunbeam, again, sapphic, sci-fi, dreamy, surrealist. It has a lot of like crossing timelines and crossing stories, and you're going to get some information and you're not going to get some other pieces of information, and you just have to be okay with that. And so I think, honestly, that would be really, really, really up your alley.
It's a great recommendation. That both of those sound really. The Cherry Magic just sounds like a hoot. That sounds like after I finish Pedro Paramo, when I just want to have fun, I'll read Cherry Magic. But yeah, no, all three of these so far, great Emma recommendations. All right, Virginia, what do you have for me?
All right, so there's a book that so I don't like to say like, oh, go read this book, because I feel like, I just don't feel right telling people that they should read books. So I have refrained from telling you about this book for the longest time. But every time I think about it, I'm like, you know what? I feel like I should tell them about this. It's a book that I talked about on the podcast briefly, I think, on a most anticipated episode. Shark Heart, a love story by Emily Habak. Every time you talk about Julia Anfield, I'm like, I want to tell her about Shark Heart. So this is not a sapphic story, but it is a love story about a husband and wife. And the husband is slowly turning into a shark. So that's the first half of the book. Yes. And then the wife, Ren, has to figure out what to do and how to learn to let go in many ways. And then the second half of the book, we meet her mom and what happened to her that also turns into some other things. So I'll let you discover that yourself. But yeah, like every time I think about, Julia Anfield, I'm just like, Shark Heart. I think that this might be a good one for Emma. So yeah, it is weird. Obviously, it is strange. And it's very like it's very like kind of like that very emotional. Like there's just all the heart-wrenching stuff. And I feel like it might be something that you may enjoy.
It sounds like something that I will probably enjoy. You said you've talked about it on a most anticipated. Is it out now?
Oh yeah. It came out a couple of years ago. So yes.
Awesome. These are great recommendations. You guys know me so well.
I think it's partly because you're also very forthcoming with what you like and not like. I feel like, I think even I'm sure our listeners would agree that even though you have not been on the podcast for like super long, like I feel like people really know what you like and not like. All right. Well, thank you, Emma, for taking a chance and reading one of these books. We have to figure out like what is our next thing? What is the next weird thing that we could do? Because we've done like random recommendation like this. We have done I think we've done like just we pick books and we draw like a name and we just got a pile of books that also didn't end up very well. So, I remember. Yeah, so we will see what else we can do to challenge our book friends. All right, so on that note, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us for Keep It Fictional, and we will see you next week. And in the meantime, happy reading.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.